A History of Religion in 5.5 Objects, Chapter 7, Soul. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. The strata of coloured clouds, the long bar of a maroon tint, away solitary by itself, the spread of purity, it lies motionless in the horizon's edge. The flying sea crow, the fragrance of salt marsh and shore mud, these became part of that child who went forth every day, and who now goes and will always go forth every day. Walt Whitman, There Was a Child Went Forth. I often remind my students that there are no one-liner definitions of religion or of anything of lasting significance in this world. And then, against all that, I turn to a one-line working definition that is a useful jumping-off point for thinking about religion. It comes from Mark C. Taylor, current chair of the Religion Department at Columbia University. Religion, Taylor says, is a complex adaptive network of myths, symbols, rituals and concepts that simultaneously figure patterns of feeling, thinking and acting and disrupt stable structures of meaning and purpose. This is not a perfect definition, nor could one really be achieved, but several things stand out here that I especially like. First is that, like any good definition or any good recipe, Taylor gives the is and does. Religion is made up of ingredients, myths, symbols, rituals and concepts. This is the stuff of religion, the elements that we find multitudinously manifested in traditions across the globe. But these things are not the totality of the definition, just as the list of ingredients for sourdough bread will not on their own produce a steaming leavened loaf. Religion also does things to people, for people, by people. It operates in the land of the living, moving, seeking, breathing, scared and secure. So religion creates or figures patterns of order, meaning and purpose, and it achieves this not by having beliefs, but through feeling, thinking and acting. Religion is a noun that is nothing without its verb, a concept that is nothing without its embodiment. What this also entails is that simplistic definitions about religion being a set of beliefs are deeply deficient. In fact, beliefs, like God, are absent here. Many of us will readily agree that some key functions of religious traditions are to establish order, meaning and purpose. Whether they do this effectively or not is the question here. What makes Taylor's definition advantageous is that disruptions to the stable orders of existence are also included among the functions of religions. Disruption, doubt, disease, dis-ease and disbelief are themselves part of the open-ended network. Religion, he suggests, is adaptive. Religion evolves. Every significant religious person of faith through history has gone through intensely important times of doubt, or feeling estranged from his or her own body, from past events, from significant others, and must confront the chaos and cacophony of the cosmic realm. Most continue to ask questions and to go on quests, seeking new cognitive formulations and sensual connections as they live out their lives. Religious histories of individuals and entire traditions alike oscillate between periods of stability and instability, constancy and volatility, ease and dis-ease, comfort and affliction, faith and doubt. Bodies at rest, bodies in motion, religious traditions then include both sides of these opposing forces. Guiding us through these alterations of faith and undergirding the myths, rituals, symbols and concepts are objects. Religion, as I hope was convincingly conveyed in the preceding chapters, is impossible without these things. We sensually engage objects at a deep bodily level, and out of such encounters are born the languages of myths and doctrines, the structured performances of rituals and ceremonies, the meanings of symbols and the very ability to think conceptually in the first place. Sensual objects give rise to primary metaphors, and these allow for the more abstract thinking, acting and feeling that are part and parcel of religious life. And so, as I conclude this book, I want to return to the suggestion made in the introduction that religion is technological, that religious people are not believers so much as technologists. We have to act. Belief is never enough. and we act with things, engaging them, using them as tools, creating art and organisations and cities out of them, just as the objects evoke actions and behaviours in us, call us to them or scare us away. In this way, religious traditions instill savoir-faire, and not merely savoir, know-how and not just knowing, as well as the know-how of working with technological objects. The French term savoir stems from the Latin sapere, which is also where we get the sapiens nomination of our species. Homo sapiens are the knowing or wise hominids. But just as bread is proofed, as we saw in the last chapter, the Latin roots of sapere also have to do with tasting. To be human is to taste and thus to test. Ultimately, to know and know how. The process is sensual through and through. Being wise depends on something outside us, the evocative objects to which we respond and which we use to build our patterns and structures of existence. And yet the nice, neat, ordered worlds we build out sometimes fall into disarray, scatter, and we are left to pick up the pieces in hopes of putting them together again, most likely in a new improvised form. The word religion stems from Latin roots and can be most directly rendered as rebinding or reconnecting. I explain this to my students and they dutifully write the fact down in their notes. When I push them a bit, two questions come to the fore. First, what exactly is bound? Maybe it's God and humans bound together. Maybe it's the binding force of the law. Maybe it's just humans bound together to form a community, strength in numbers and all that. And so go the better of the responses. Sometimes a second, more intriguing question emerges from these definitions. What happened to the first binding? Rebinding implies that something has come loose, the ties untied. Some disruption of stable structures has ensued. My playfully serious suggestion here is that religion in its deepest forms aims to rebind the half-body to the world, sensually connecting the interior realms of existence to the exterior realms and thus crafting soul. And maybe, just maybe, soul is produced when humans consciously engage the things and bodies of the world. Soulcraft. Soul, on this account, is not some interior invisible substance, and it cannot have a definite article. Rather, it is thoroughly material, stemming from physical connections, though not, à la Descartes, found in a specific part of the anatomy. It is not an immutable essence, but a human technological production that comes and goes, ebbs and flows. In 1930, the blues singer Blind Willie Johnson sought an answer to the question, what is the soul of a man? His song of that name tells of his travels and talks with people, and his reading the Bible in search of an answer. Through it all, as far as he can tell, it's nothing but a burning light. Soul is like the spark alighting from two stones rubbed together, fleeting, temporary, but potent nonetheless. An occasional flame erupts, yet even that burning light is codependent on oxygen and fuel to burn. An eternal flame is everlasting only in a relative way. The flame is new and different in each twinkling of an eye. What I mean is that to understand soul, and thus the rebinding of religion, we would do well to listen to soul music, eat soul food. Soul emerges technologically when the music is played, heard, felt, when the food is baked, tasted, shared. There is no real separation between body and soul, and so without some bodily sensing activity, soul doesn't exist, or at least it goes dormant. It lies in a nascent state below the surface of things, within stones and drum beats, broken bread and broken bodies, awaiting sensual contact. Soul comes forth, is birthed, awakens when head and heart meet the world. The spark alights through sensual connection. Even so, soul is ultimately untamed and untamable, though practice might improve the possibility for its presence. Poet Gary Snyder gets to the dichotomy in his Buddhist-rooted practice of the wild, a deliberate, sustained and conscious effort to be more finely attuned to ourselves and to the way the actual existing world is. The world, with the exception of a tiny bit of human intervention, is ultimately a wild place. It is that side of our being which guides our breath and digestion, and when observed and appreciated is a source of deep intelligence. This practice does not make perfect, but puts us in our proper place of connecting with the deeper, wild reality of things. Adapting Snyder's comments, I suggest that soul materialises when the half-body makes conscious contact with the wild and woolly elements of the world. Despite all the flaws and failures of religious and artistic traditions, they still retain something of this conscious contact among their core aims. One artist, the author D.H. Lawrence, offers something along these lines with his own credo, saying he believes that my soul is a dark forest, that my known self will never be more than a little clearing in the forest, that gods, strange gods, come forth from the forest into the clearing of my known self and then go back. Then I must have the courage to let them come and go. Soul is wild, and as the educator Parker J. Palmer has noted, a bit shy. Palmer suggests that it doesn't like to be talked about, and if you go into the woods shouting for it, it will hide in its hole. It doesn't want to be captured or civilised, and tenaciously survives. Soul is not something we have, it is out of our possession. We don't own it, and oftentimes we can barely find it. The ancient Greeks used the word psyche, from which we get the words psychology and psychiatry, to denote the soul. The term also meant breath or even wind. The Romans followed with the Latin word anima, from which we get animation and ad animal, which similarly was used for soul, breath and air. Unanimous also stems from this root, meaning of one mind or soul. In the chapter on incense, we saw some translations of the Hebrew terms for wind and spirit and their connection to smell through the words riach and ruach. And we find correspondences in the Sanskrit where the term most directly related to the Western concept of soul is Atman, which is where we get the word atmosphere. All this suggests that while it may be invisible, soul is still physical and acts in the world, guiding and moving us, breathed into us. Soul is blowing in the breeze. As an undergraduate philosophy major, I struggled through my own intellectual and sensual connections with the world, believing in some kind of afterlife, and thus a soul that might migrate to that great beyond. But my conceptions of it were disillusioning and often disturbing. None of the visions of heaven that I'd heard and read about resonated in me. Singing for 1,000 years, streets of gold, floating on clouds. And so, like blind Willie before me, I went in search of the soul. I travelled and I talked to people and I read. And I set up some time with my philosophy professor to explore the ancient Western visions of the soul, reading Plato, Aristotle and Augustine on the topic. The dualism that Plato and later Augustine proposed was a bit distasteful to me. As a lover of the wilderness and music, of hot coffee and face-to-face conversations in far-off lands that last deep into the night, I had trouble viewing the body as a physical thing that would be transcended by the soul at the death of the body. Too much delight was given to the ethereal soul and too much disdain towards the sensual delights of the body. For me, my soul came alive in and through the material realities of life, as difficult as those might be. I don't know if a soul has an afterlife beyond the body, but I came to believe that is the wrong question. And so it was to Aristotle that I kept coming back. I'm still not sure I fully get the old Greek. His relentless systematising of such things as form and matter and body and soul and perception and intellect grow a bit wearying, but it is in his great treatise on the soul, De Anima, that he states, "Soul is that by which primarily we live and perceive and think." While his full account goes into significantly more complexities, it is this simple statement that haunts me and sustains me. There is a dualism involved, but Aristotle does seem to indicate that souls cannot be active without a body. A body may be animated by soul, but a soul cannot exist or act separately from the body. At heart, soul is implicated in our perceptions and thoughts, woven into the way we live, and not necessarily about the way we live after this life. Soul is animation, and we are animated through smelling and tasting, reading and believing, chewing over some idea or on a piece of fruit. Such primary perceptions and conceptions are taken further, not by philosophers in this case, but by the children's book author Marjorie Williams in her 1922 The Velveteen Rabbit, subtitled How Toys Become Real. In the story, the wet behind the ears stuffed rabbit seeks guidance from the wise skin horse on the ways of the world, asking, "What is real?" The skin horse gives some indication of the process needed to become real. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. What animates the toys, what makes them alive, is not something inside them, bells and buzzers and wind-up mechanisms, but a connection with something beyond the skin, beneath their loved-off hair. The real, the life force, is not a thing, but a relationship. You don't have to believe this account of soul to get something from this book. I won't push any more to convince you of it, but I will push for a rethinking and re-experiencing of religion as a deeply, thoroughly, unfailing physical activity. The body cannot be disregarded, as some have considered, as a bag of bones to be left behind as the soul migrates onward and upward. Instead, the crux of religion itself is a sensual engagement with the physical objects of the world. I believe that starting a history of religion from this point also offers the potentials for a renewed take on dialogues between religions, an increasingly necessary task. Instead of asking whether all gods are the same thing, they aren't, we might have renewed respect for each other if we begin in wonder of why so many of us carry stones, burn incense, beat drums, regard crosses, and eat bread as part of our religious devotion. My interest in writing this book has been in bringing us to our religious senses, to become aware of the objects we've come to love across ages and continents, and to realise how central they are to our spiritual lives. And while we use objects on daily, even hourly basis, we often forget their power and stop listening for their evocations. More than likely, we are taught not to listen, taught not to believe these objects have any worth, no matter how much we use them. The spiritual life, we are often told, is not found out there in the land of things, but is interior, invisible, silent. By investing in such stingy interpretations of the wisdom found across religious traditions, we forsake the rich depths of this world, this body, these things. As long as the spiritual realm is set in opposition to the material realm, we can only remain deeply and intractably unaware. It is springtime here in central New York. My daughters are playing outside, searching for branches that had fallen into the snow and are revealed in the thaw, and discovered the slow awakening of grubs and worms and salamanders that had gone dormant through the cold winter. In spite of feeble protests from the animal, they bring them back to life, not merely by waking them up, but also by telling stories about them, by naming the salamanders and putting them in an old plastic takeaway tub, or by turning a stick into a magical weapon, a conjuring device. The objects are resurrected, made vibrant, liberated from their slumbers in a deep, dark kingdom. In so doing, the girls put their own half-bodies into action, connecting with the backyard wild. In so doing, they participate in transformative rituals and imaginative stories akin to the basic activities of this much larger, much more global, sometimes violent, sometimes peaceful body-mind enterprise we've come to call religion. Maybe the original binding of inner and outer worlds and of body and soul, of religion itself, was loosed when we became adults. We stopped believing in our senses and trusted only our intellect. We believed thinking and sensing were separate and separable functions. We were forbidden to put things in our mouths to figure out what they were. Tasting and testing were once linked. But we severed those ties and were told testing is a thinking activity, not a bodily one. Sit still, don't touch. We learned to ignore the pictures in our books and only read the words, since that's where we heard truth resided. Sigmund Freud once famously quipped, "Religion is comparable to a childhood neurosis," and he is optimistic enough to suppose that mankind will surmount this neurotic phase. 100 years after Freud, however, it's time for a renewed take on it all. If imagination and a greater connection to the stuff of nature are childish things, then so be it. The world is weary of grown-up ideas. There is no way back to an imagined childhood life, but one hope I have with this book is that we will begin to feel again, to acknowledge the basic stuff around us, to see and hear and taste and touch and smell with renewed senses and sensibilities, and thus come to a deeper spiritual life. Perhaps you too have your objects kept in your pocket, on your bedstand, above the fireplace on your desk. This book celebrates some of these objects. It celebrates the materiality of religious life and offers an explanation of why religions continue to invest in the objects of the world. It may sound strange to say, but if up to this point you've understood my fledgling attempt to justify the role of objects in our spiritual lives, you'll understand when I say we need stuff, even junk, and old broken branches in our lives.